Hey people, it's Sleepy Reader, here with my somewhat delayed or much delayed part 3 of my Marvel Now thoughts. My thoughts on what I'm thinking about Marvel Now after, these 3 or 4 months of Marvel Now. And this third part is kind of the happy yay part, where I talk about my favorite books from Marvel Now. And there are some very good ones, particularly these 3 that I have lined up here. All New X-Men, Uncanny XMen, both by Brian Michael Bendis, and Thor, God of Thunder by Jason Aaron and Isaac Ribic, along with some other people. Anyhow, so I think I'll start by chatting about Thor. Thor, let's see. It focuses on the 3 ages of Thor. Young Thor, middle period Thor, sort of our Thor now, and an ancient, elderly Thor living alone in Asgard, missing many of his limbs, and all the other gods are gone. And it's kind of a time-traveling story linked by Thor's encounters with this guy, Gore the God Killer. So I would characterize it as being like a really good fantasy novel. Like I could imagine it sitting on the shelves if it were a prose novel alongside the likes of Michael Moorcock or Roger Zelazny or that kind of thing. It's a really interesting, exciting fantasy story that happens to involve Norse gods along with lots of other sort of fictional made-up gods. Because we find out through this story that there's endless numbers of gods on endless numbers of worlds, and Gore has made it his business to butcher them all. Until, I guess, at the sort of end times of it all, the only one left is Thor. He saved Thor as his final victim. And we also get a bit of a view of this universe full of gods, where there's one sort of celestial city that's, even more amazing and infinite than any other god cities, where all the gods from around the universe can come and visit and learn things, and they have a great library and everything. So this fits into my sort of category of things that have strayed really far from the original superhero idea that I've always had of Thor anyway. Where this doesn't have to be Marvel's Thor. It could be a fantasy novel featuring Thor. Nonetheless, or it maybe because of that, it's very, very good. I wonder how much of this will be brought into a permanent part of Thor's continuity over the next few years, and 10 years down the road, will any of this really matter? It seems obviously now we have a thing where we see a future where all the gods are wiped out and defeated by this fellow, and it's hard to believe that will stand. One imagines that through the magic of time travel, most of this will be undone. Another interesting thing I thought about it is, people talk about how creators don't bring new characters into the big 2 comic book companies anymore because they are saving them for themselves. But here, Jason Aaron has created a major villain. And the other really notable thing about this is the incredible art. Whoops, that's not even the art. By Isaac Ribic, which evokes the best of the old fantasy novel paperback covers. It makes you think of Frank Frazetta and Jeffrey Jones and Roy Krengle and a lot of those other great painters particularly from the 60s and 70s, but also the 80s and 90s fantasy novels. which is amazing to have that as interior art. And I assume a lot of the credit should go to both Itzhak Ribic, and the colorist, whose name is hard to say, Ive Sforcina, I don't know. But it makes for some very impressive art. And then, here's another thing. So we've got supposedly a 5-issue arc, and then there's issue 6. That's the origins of Gore, and then there's supposed to be another arc with Gore. But really, there's no completion to the 5-issue arc. It ends on a total cliffhanger, and the one sour note in all of these 5 issues was struck for me was this final panel after we get a kind of cliffhanger reveal just before this panel, and this full-page splash, and I can't even tell what's going on there. Maybe someone can tell me what was happening there. Or maybe I'll understand what I'm looking at when I get issue 7. Or if I do the AR, maybe. I haven't been doing ARs. And then in issue 6, we got a kind of origin of Gore, but I would say it's a kind of incomplete origin. It only tells us some things about Gore. One of the interests, and it's by different artists, so it's a bit of a letdown. I mean, decent enough standard comic book artists. One of the interesting things about Gore is, in a way, he's an atheist supervillain, or he would like to live in an atheistic universe. He's killing all gods because gods don't care about people, and in his opinion, and in fact bring them down and waste everyone's time, and people are dying while they're sacrificing to the gods, and the universe, in his view, would be a better place without gods. And yet, that goal turns him into kind of a sadistic serial killer of gods, where he tortures gods and kills them in as many brutal ways as he can think of. So, but what I wanted to say about issue 6 was, even though it gives us a good deal of information about Gore, there's still a lot of big question marks, including the nature of his power and why he can overcome all the other gods just because of this black thing or black stuff that he got from a god or an alien that fell down to his planet. What that stuff is and what power it gives him and why he can time travel and why he is immortal and has so much power over the other gods is not clear. Maybe we'll find out all of that in the next arc. So at the very least, this is really an 11-issue story, and it almost feels like it could go on longer than that. So in that sense, although I'm really loving getting it now, it makes a lot of sense to buy this in trades. It doesn't at all have a feeling of an issue-by-issue kind of... I mean, it's exciting to get each issue, but each issue doesn't have like its own unique little sub-story or anything like that. It's just all one long story. But highly recommended, especially when it comes out in trade, or if you're okay with paying the high price for the individual issues. Yeah, so, and I want it sort of brings the gods that we've known in the Marvel Universe down a notch, makes them a much smaller part of the bigger picture of the universe, although that makes sense. Okay, on to an even better book, which is the all-new X-Men. And I got the first five issues digitally. I would have actually liked to have gotten them physically, but they became impossible to track down all 5. So I went ahead and just read them digitally, and I'm going to get the trade because I loved them so much. And I was helped in getting the digital copies by Cfro355 and White James Brandon. So big thanks to them. I I thought this was the stupidest idea I ever heard of when they announced it before it came out. To bring the early X-Men team into our present for them to face Cyclops as he is now, the kind of possibly evil Magneto-ish Cyclops. But it's been brilliant, and each issue is very satisfying and very exciting to read, and leaves you wanting to read the next issue at the same time. And there's been a set of great artists working on it. So this seems to be Brian Michael Bendis, doing his very best work. I mean, I haven't read everything he's written, but this is the best stuff I've ever read by him. And I feel like other writers ought to read what he's doing on an issue-by-issue basis here to create as a lesson on how to create the individual issues as part of the arc and keep everything balanced out so that it's an exciting read, but it's also like a soap opera where you need to go on to the next episode, but you have a sense of completeness. These are the ones that I most consider worth, the premium price that Marvel charges for their comics. And I guess that's all there really is to say about it. There's amongst the best superhero comics being put out right now. And one thing I really appreciate about these is that although they're mature and sophisticated, they also read as part of the continuum of the Marvel Universe. They feel true to the origins of these characters and these stories, and so they're everything to everyone. They don't need to break off from the Marvel Universe and go off and do a story that really doesn't belong in the Marvel Universe to do something new. So big hats off to Bendis and his artistic co-creators. And then Uncanny XMen is almost as good. My sense is that maybe Bendis didn't spend as much time planning and building up all the complicated elements in this as he has in All New X-Men, but it's very good. It's a bit more like a chess game, kind of, where different different sort of players in the story are being moved around and manipulated by each other, and you're trying to figure out who's doing what to who and who's really got good intentions or bad intentions, if anyone. The artwork here is a little harder to get used to, but there's a lot of good work in the layouts of it. And it's also very interesting that the artist, Chris Bachalo, is doing his own coloring. And I think the coloring is very, very interesting to look at. It's kind of just a unique little palette and enhances the artwork. My complaint about this artist is he tends to put he has an interesting style, a little bit different than your standard comic books, but he tends to put characters in similar poses and similar facial expressions over and over again, and it gets a little hard to read in the sense of reading the emotions, or the acting, you might say, of the characters becomes kind of wooden seeming. But it's a very enjoyable book and worth looking into. Kind of a companion to All New X-Men. I don't think you have to read it to get All New X-Men. I don't think you have to be reading All New X-Men to get this, although I think if you were to read just one, you'd be better off reading All New X-Men. So anyway, other things that I'm enjoying that are part of Marvel now are stuff I think I kind of talk about elsewhere, like Daredevil. And Daredevil, along with All New X-Men, feels to me to be the other comic that is really true to the feeling that I expect from Marvel Comics going back through the decades, and managing to do these kind of sophisticated stories but also capture something of the fun and the feel of these characters that just seems right to me. On the other side of things, I enjoy Hawkeye a lot, which is a totally sort of different take and approach, and very much not in the Marvel tradition. It almost feels like in the tradition of the more further out on the fringes indie kind of comics, but just done in a more slick commercial way, perhaps. Aided a lot by some of the fantastic art that's in it. In fact, I think a lot of it works because of the art. And I feel the same way about the other Matt Fraction book that I like, which is FF. I think it's the art that makes it work. This sort of odd, quirky approach to things. I don't think I'm deeply involved in the plot, unlike Daredevil or All New X-Men or Thor or some of the others. I'm happy reading the individual issue, but I'm not dying to read the next issue. It's just fun. I'm going to enjoy it. There's nothing deeply involving about the plot or the characters. It's just sort of fun to read. Another promising book is The Fearless Defenders, which is by Colin Bunn and has kind of a sort of old exploitation action movie feel to it to me. The art kind of went downhill in issue 2. It was the same artist as issue 1, but maybe more rushed or something, I'm just guessing. And I don't know whether I was influenced by the art, but the story felt a little less strong in issue 2. So I'm kind of feeling like the jury's out on Fearless Defenders for me. Is there anything else that I should mention? Yeah, so that's it. And Fearless Defenders, is this straying too far from Marvel? It's using very much fringe characters from Marvel, and it's fun. I like it. It's only $2.99. So yeah, overall, doing these videos and looking at all the Marvel comics I've been reading and kind of putting them into perspective makes me like what's going on at Marvel a lot more now than I realized I did. So I'm thinking about, I may or may not do a video where I try to sort of compare what I like and don't like about Marvel and what I like and don't like about DC, sort of comparing the two. Which would just be for fun. I mean, it's really not fair to compare the two of them. They're both, in my opinion, companies that produce a good number of good comic books. And also, each one produces some that I don't like very much. So, another one that I've read digitally, thanks to White James Brandon. Brandon White is his real name. White James Brandon's the name of his channel. Was Nova number 1 and 2. And those were very good. Kind of like Spider-Man to me, a good entry-level comic book, a solid entry-level comic book, which I can kind of take or leave. I think it maybe would be most appealing to a younger reader. So, yeah. I'm not ending on a really great conclusion, but I'd say, one of the predominant paths in Marvel, which is best exemplified by Thor, is creators really taking off in a unique, unusual direction. And the risk there is that while they're good stories, often they don't really feel like part of the Marvel universe. And you sort of feel like, well, couldn't they have just done some odder books rather than do it to Thor or whatever, or to Captain America? And then you have some that successfully meld the past traditions with kind of a modern feel. So that's kind of the two threads at Marvel for me. I'll talk to you guys all later. Bye-bye.